Go for it.
All right, y'all. Is that the real deal? Good to be with you today. I am Johnny Robertson, and we are on What Does the Bible School. And I'm picking up on last Tuesday, and I must say that a lot of things have happened since last Tuesday. Let me see about looking at some different slides. And I want to begin with, I hate to be this way, but it's just, it fits into our narrative, if I can put it that way. If you're with us, you know that we're studying the book of Genesis. And what we're doing is we're trying to make sure that you recognize that it's very possible that you didn't get what you needed when you went through Genesis. And we also want you to know that if you are now going through Genesis in a teaching program somewhere, it's very possible that you're still not going to get what you need. And one of the ways I know that is that when I went through a program, I had one of my first classes was Genesis. And we spent all this time in Genesis as if that is where you start, because the book actually contains Genesis in the front of it. And so today what we're trying to do is help you to realize, and if you're out here and you're not even thinking about being a, let's say a full-out teacher, you're just trying to figure it out. You're not going to figure it out by starting with Genesis. And that's basically what we started with last week. And I presented information, and I'm going to go over it a little bit again this morning. I presented information that Genesis was not handed to Adam and Eve. When Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, if you're reading the book of Genesis and you read Genesis 1 and 2 and you read about Adam and Eve, and you're basically thinking, okay, I'm going to really be able to get a grasp on this. I'm going to pay all the attention that I can. I'm going to shut out everybody. Let's say you're going to give it a month. You're just going to be digging a hole for a month. Adam and Eve were not given the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis did not come along until Exodus 19 and following. And so basically the book was written to individuals who had, we're saying how many years from the Garden of Eden to the time of Exodus chapter 19? Well, Methuselah himself lived 969 years, so you know that there's that much time. And so everybody died in the flood time frame. So you have Noah and his family, and Noah's family is the family from which Abraham came, and Abraham, then his family, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob ends up in Egypt. They stay 4 generations or 430 years. According to the book of Exodus, they stayed that long. So you've got a multitude of years that you are basically dealing with, and you're trying to study Genesis like it's the book that is going to start you off. No, it's the book that's going to confuse you. And so what I'm basically saying this morning is, just to begin with this way, the children of Israel at Mount Sinai received the information that is in Genesis. From there, Moses began to give them instructions as he was given instructions, and eventually when you get to Deuteronomy 26, you actually hear that there is a book that was finished and put in the side of the ark. Now, we're going to look at this kind of thing, but the way I want to start this morning is I want to start with something that we actually ended with, or that we kept presenting in last week's lesson, and I'm going to try to make it applicable today and demonstrate to you today why I think you're going to get this when you might not have gotten it last month. What did the children of Israel, as they were standing at Mount Sinai, I basically have them surrounding Mount Sinai. If you're reading your Bible and you're looking at numbers and things of that nature, you're going to know that at least 600,000 people are standing here, and they're spread out by tribes. And this valley, this area, you can see Mount Sinai for 10 miles. So these individuals that are spread out, they're seeing smoke, they're seeing the mountain quake, they're seeing a cloud come down on it, they're seeing blast of a trumpet that just gets louder and louder and louder. And you might say, well, what is in the trumpet? What is the blast of the trumpet? And other passages, basically Psalm 68, I believe, is saying that there's multitudes of angels that are involved in this. So that's what they needed. What was happening? God was giving them something that would impact them because he was beginning a nation right here. These individuals had to last. The information given to them, the impact that it had on them had to be transmitted from them to their to their children and to their children and to their children, all the way till you get to the book of Matthew and Luke. Luke, which Caleb is actually studying yesterday, you would have the generations, the lineage of Jews from this time all the way up to Jesus. Well, how do you keep a people together? How do you keep them keeping up with their lineage? How do you keep them in a particular area so you can recognize them after that amount of time? Well, you have to do something that's very impactful, and this is what it is. They were standing here at this particular instance. This was their declaration. It's like their constitution is being given to them, just like we today have still 400 years later, or 200 something years later, we still recognize our constitution, and people are saying that they have the right to freedom, and we're actually thinking about things now, right now. So here I go again. Why is it that you might study Genesis and you wouldn't have last month? Here's why. Because right now we're in a time frame where individuals are being impacted in a way. I've been here maybe 45 minutes, and since I've been here, I know that one person called in talking about 2 Chronicles 7:14 needs to be told over the air. While the guy was saying that on the phone, I was saying he's an idiot. That was not said to him. That was said to Jews. Why in the world would you call up with a Jew passage and tell us that's what we all need to do in America? What we need to do is get rid of all these denominations. So, and we need to get rid of people that would call in and say stuff like that. They don't know what they're talking about. How do you know that it isn't the case that all the confusion that we have is not a result of the religious people not knowing what they're doing in religion? And you know they don't. Who is making the most money? Who is benefiting the most out of religion in Martinsville, Henry County, in the two states area, all over the United States? People who sell brick and mortar. They're the ones benefiting. People, they have like if you just go down Starling Avenue, it's ridiculous the amount of different ways that individuals congregate because they can't agree with each other. And then the crazy thing about it is for instance, the United Pentecostals, the one in the Godhead Apostolics, some of the Apostolics, you can't keep up with which one of them's which now. Darcel's now saying, her husband's saying that you should have women preachers. Her daddy would be rolling over in the grave. The so-called Bishop Kellum, they didn't have women preachers. Lawrence Campbell just changed to women preachers. Now stay with me on what's that got to do with brick and mortar. If you can't have a woman preacher in one church, then you need another building so you can have it. And if you switch right in the middle of it, some people are not going to switch with you. They're not going to divide with you, so you need more brick and mortar. And so, case in point, the First Baptist up here at Starling Avenue, the people who started that would be rolling over in their grave because now they have a woman preacher. It's a wonder that they didn't split and have to have another building like Galilee Missionary Baptist Church out on 57. Individuals out there, they built this humongous building out here on 58, and Michael Penn pretty much took whatever they had, and there were a lot of disgruntled individuals, and they did not want to go to Galilee House of Worship. See, got another one, brick and mortar, $4 million for that conglomeration out there. Did we need it? No. He's changed from what he was, a Baptist, to apostolic bishop now, which didn't help him. It surely didn't make his brain expand. And so the people out there on Highway 57, did they get to occupy the old Galilee Missionary Baptist Church? No. I don't know if they sold. I don't know if Michael Penn sold it. I don't know if he's renting it. I'm really not sure, but I know the people that were in the Galilee Missionary Baptist Church are not in it. Why? How do I know that? Because they're building another building right beside it. So you see what we're saying? Individuals that are calling in and saying, well, let's read 2 Chronicles 7:14. Why? That was not to you. That was a passage that was stated to the Jews, and it involved actually a temple. Do you have a temple? Can you pray towards the temple? None of that applies to you in that sense today. So I'm wondering, has there enough taken place yet that individuals are starting to say, you know, we might need to examine the direction that we're taking. Now, please do not quote me to say that I know that God is punishing America. I don't know what God is doing. How in the world could I know what God is doing? And just because your pastor says he does doesn't mean he does either. Individuals are just using scare tactics and things of that nature, but I'm not using a scare tactic. I'm simply saying this. While you're in wonderment, while you are scared, while you are wondering how long this possibly could last, and maybe it would be a good time for you to think about, well, I might want to change my behavior because it seems that everybody around here thinks somebody that they know is going to get the coronavirus, and everybody's scared to death. You can't even get into a restaurant anymore, and heaven forbid the SPCA close down to people being able to go in. I was thinking, now, what in the world does that have to do with the coronavirus? And it's just like everybody is acting hysterical as a result of this. Now, you might be saying, Johnny, what should we do? I don't know what you should do. I'm saying from a standpoint of the fact that you're scared to death and you're wondering what in the world might happen next, this is when people decide, maybe I should have a look at the Bible. And what I'm trying to get you to do is not to go to the Bible as a first-time reader or go to the Bible and say, I'm scared and I'm worried and I might want to do some traveling in my mind and get closer to God. Well, don't start with the book of Genesis in the way that you normally start in the book of Genesis. Why not, Johnny? Okay, let's go back up. Let's look at a little bit of our slides from last week and remind you of this. If you want to study the book of Genesis, one of the first things you need to realize is Moses wrote it. And if Moses wrote it, Moses is living in the time of the Exodus. So what that means is those people already knew a lot of the things that Moses was telling them as the book of Genesis was being presented to them. So do you know a lot of the things that are being presented to you already as you read Genesis? Well, if you don't, then you're not in the same position as those individuals. Let's quickly demonstrate again that Moses wrote it, and then let's make our point again so that we can catch up again. Luke 24:15. This would be Jesus after he resurrected. He's getting his disciples ready to go out into all the world. It came to pass that while they communed together and reasoned, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. Luke 24:27, and beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning him. Ask yourself this question. If everything in all the scriptures are actually expounded to them or narrated to them, if all of the things concerning Jesus in all of the scriptures are being expounded to them and he began at Moses, does that not tell you that Moses actually wrote Genesis? Why? Because some of the things about Jesus are in the book of Genesis. There are prophecies called Messianic Prophecies, prophecies that specifically refer to Jesus and that are quoted in the New Testament by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that come from the book of Genesis and that are applied to Jesus. So, if all of the scriptures are being expounded or narrated to these disciples about Jesus so that they can make sure that they understand that Jesus is Jesus, how is it that they will understand by doing this? He fulfilled all of the prophecies about him. Well, where are some of these prophecies? They began with Moses. Well, are we going to start with Exodus? Because you know Moses is alive during Exodus. Or are you going to use common sense and logic Jesus in Genesis, and if I'm beginning with Moses, Moses must be the author of Genesis. It's just that simple. Luke 24:36. Now we moved ahead a little bit. We're in 27, now we're in 36. Different setting. He's talking to disciples again. Now, folks, what he's trying to do is get their confidence level up. He is about to leave. He is about to ascend. They are about to have to go out and start dealing with the public. Who's the public? The people that killed Jesus. So he's trying to build their confidence up. What builds their confidence up more than actually being able to see that this man actually fulfilled all of the New Testament scriptures that prophesied things that would happen to him, that he would die, that he would actually raise from the dead, that he would die on a cross in a cursed kind of way, hanged on a tree. They're just born in Bethlehem, all kinds of things that riding into the city triumphant on a colt, the foal of an ass, rather than a gigantic war horse like most kings would come in on, or a mule like, and I don't believe it's mules like the ones we see today, like one of the sons of David tried to enter into the city on. Jesus came the way it said. So what is he doing? He's building their confidence. Why are they not confident? Because he died, and that scared them. Well, now he's showing himself to them alive, and he is also building confidence in a way that only the Scripture can do. Now, why did I say that? Because this has been with them since the time of Exodus. All of this information has been with them since the time of Exodus, and that's how they were raised. They've lived with it. It's comforting to them, and if they can set it in their mind that Jesus did all of this, then they know that even though he's about to leave, he was the prophesied Messiah. They've seen him alive, and even if they die preaching his message, they're going to die if they have that confidence level up. Someone might say, well, how do you know they weren't confident? Peter denied Jesus 3 times after saying, I'll die for you, die with you. They all fled. Now here they are, huddled, scared to death, and when the women told the apostles that they had seen Jesus alive, they didn't believe him. So Jesus chastised them in verse 36. As they thus spake, Jesus himself stood in the midst of them and said unto them, Peace be unto you. How are you going to give us peace, Jesus? And he said unto them, These are the words which I spake unto you while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled which are written in the law of Moses. Is there anything about Jesus in Genesis? Yes. Well, therefore, Genesis is involved in the law of Moses. When he said it to the men that he was talking to a minute ago, he said all the scriptures that pertaining to him, he narrated and explained to them, beginning at Moses. Are there any scriptures in Genesis that pertain to Jesus? Yes, beginning at Moses. Genesis was written by Moses. Now, here's the thing. That brings us then to the thorny question of if Moses wrote Genesis, and the people that Moses was telling Genesis to, as it was being put together in a codified way, in other words, in letters, they were basically hearing the information and it was being put into letters, then these individuals knew what he was talking about. They might not have processed it, just like Jesus is having to tell his own disciples. These are things that you need to recognize. This is what this meant. That's what Moses is doing too. They spent a lot of time. We're going to look at that in just a minute. You need to get this in your head. They spent a lot of time at Mount Sinai while a lot of procedures, including their new worship, was all being set up. And see, you won't know that. You'll end up starting Exodus, and you'll think that Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers, you'll think that they're spread out and that you need to read each one of them in different settings. No, you need to realize they actually correspond with each other. They're happening simultaneously, and I'm going to show you that in just a minute. And so, you see, that's going to be so helpful. So, what are we saying? We're saying, Deuteronomy 31:24, at the end of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, at the end of this time frame, The Bible says, and it came to pass when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this law in a book until they were finished. You see, all of this was finished at the time frame of Deuteronomy 31, with the exception of the death of Moses. Take this book of the law and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be therefore a witness against thee. So they have, by this point, in Deuteronomy chapter 31, they have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And Genesis, again, was not handed to Adam and Eve. It was not handed to Abel. It was not handed to Seth. It was not handed to Noah when he got out of the ark. That's not the way this worked. This particular book was codified or put into letters. It was created as a part of the law at Exodus 19 at Mount Sinai. Now, Exodus 24, verse 7. Look at this. They're receiving the information in Exodus 24. And he took the book of the covenant and he read in the audience of the people, and they said, all that the Lord hath said, we will do and be obedient. Now, Moses basically has taken the leaders of the princes or the leaders of the tribes that make up Israel. Now, you might say, you know, someone tried to get me to memorize basically the sons of Jacob, but I didn't really realize that it would be that important. You know, when these people are traveling right now, are going to travel, let's just say, and when they get their marching orders to go into the promised land, they're going to have an ark of the covenant. They're going to have all of their items associated with setting up their worship. They're going to have 6 wagons full of different things that they'll use to set up the tabernacle, which will house their worship items like the Ark of the Covenant and the showbread, table of the showbread, and the lamps that are inside, all of this kind of stuff, and they're going to travel. Now, how in the world would you move 600,000? At least 600,000. The reason I keep using 600,000 because I know they have an army of 600,000. So if you have an army of that size, you've got to have a huge number of individuals from which you could get an army of that size. So this is a huge group of individuals that are traveling. Well, how are they going to travel? Well, they're basically going to be set up in a particular manner. And if you were looking at that, you would basically look at the sons of Jacob. And how are you going to set them up? How would you set them up if you were going to travel? Well, you have Jacob having one wife named Rachel and another wife named Leah. Now, Leah actually is the sister of Rachel, and Jacob was supposed to get Rachel to marry. Now, that's in the book of Genesis. They all know this. They know their own history, but it's actually written down now. All of the information is written down. 3 times at least you have the table of nations laid out. But just let me make this point. You have Rachel, and she is barren. So, and not only that, her father gives Leah, her sister, to Jacob first. When she was supposed to marry him, when Rachel was supposed to marry him, somehow or other he got Leah. Well, it has to do with their custom of how a wife was turned over to her husband in the first place, and it's a ritual that's associated with it being at night, and he did not see which wife that he was given or which woman he was given to wife, and he ended up being given Leah, and when he came in the morning, he knew that it was Leah. So he ends up, some of you have heard this account, he ends up working for 7 more years for Rachel. But during that time frame, Leah is having children. She's having Reuben, she's having Simeon, she's having Judah, she's having Levi. So these individuals are brothers of the same mother. Well, you might say, well, where does Rachel come in? Well, Rachel has a handmaid named Bilhah, and she starts having children vicariously through Bilhah. So if you think about it, these children are raised in the tent of Rachel by their mother Bilhah, but their emotions would be to Rachel as they were growing up. That's going to be who it is that they're the closest to. And so on the other side over here, you have Leah. These boys are being raised up in Leah's tent, and Leah has a handmaid named Zilpah. And so Zilpah actually has children through Jacob as well. They're being raised up in the same tent with Leah are in the tent with Zilpah, who is the handmaiden and is waiting on Jacob as well. So you see this familiarity that is actually being built. And these people are actually set up around the Ark of the Covenant as a result of the familial feeling and the relationship that they have. Even though they're all sons of Jacob, they're sons with different mothers. And so it would make a lot of sense for you to know things like that. You will find out this information in the book of Genesis. You would never figure out why Moses situated individuals around the Ark of the Covenant if you did not know that. If you didn't know the familial association that these individuals had with each other as a result of being the sons of a different mother and all sons of Jacob. So, notice this. This is all written in a book. The book is being narrated, or the information is being narrated to the people and explained to them. Now, the reason I know this is because I see it in other places as well. For instance, last week we went over this, Nehemiah 8. When they came back from the land of captivity, they had the same scenario. Nehemiah is given the book, and they actually read Nehemiah 8:8. They read in the book and give the sense of it. We'll see that passage as we go along. So, what does that mean? Individuals coming back in from Babylonian captivity, they've been away from being able to read the law, hear the law in a foreign country because they've been disobedient. They don't have their religious rights, kind of like what we're being told. We're fixing to lose our religious rights. For the first time in United States history, the government is about to intervene and tell you that you cannot assemble in your places of worship. That is a totally new, absolutely unheard of imposition and or trial in regard to just how much power our government is going to try to put to bear as a result of the coronavirus. Now, if that happens, if they tell you that you can't worship, that you can't assemble, it's going to set precedent for just how much power the government is going to have. All of a sudden now you're seeing that your government has the power to tell you can't assemble. And you might say, well, I agree with it. I'm going to go along with it. Well, you need to think that through. Whatever you let the government do to you once, you might as well get ready. That's precedent that the government can do it to you twice. So this is the kind of thing that we're involved in here, and it ought to make you think too. Am I sure when we talk about politics, I really don't care about politics, and I'm not worried about the coronavirus or any of this stuff, because when it comes down to it, I don't have a problem worshiping in a home anyway. If you read in the New Testament, individuals were worshiping in their home. So I'm not worried about that. We can actually, from a studio, wherever the different people are congregated in their homes, we can actually stream in the preaching. Where I happen to be in a home, worship with some people, we can stream in our sermon to all the other different individuals at this particular time. So, and it's not going to affect us. We're still going to worship. We just may be worshiping in our homes like they were in the first century. But I'm saying to the rest of y'all, you better pay attention. Now, why was Genesis being given to these individuals at this particular time? The children of Israel, that is Jacob's children, his name has been changed. The children of Israel have been 400 years in Egypt. They were only about 70-something people when they entered into Egypt. Why did they come to Egypt? If you're reading from Genesis chapter somewhere in the 40s, you would hear there was a famine in the land, and they ended up going into Egypt to buy supplies. Well, how did they end up getting there? Remember, they had sold their brother Joseph to the Ishmaelites, and he ended up in Egypt. He ends up through a process of going to jail as a result of being falsely accused. He ends up in a position to tell a dream. It ends up being the case that the king Pharaoh has a dream, and he is told that there's somebody in his kingdom that can interpret the dream, and that's what Joseph does. And Joseph then is made second to Pharaoh. All of a sudden, the famine comes along. His brothers come to town who sold him. He sees them. The whole story plays out. We'll get into that in our further lessons. The whole story plays out. Next thing you know, they bring Jacob, and they're living in the land of Goshen, which is an Egyptian suburb of one of the cities they were living in. And that's how they got there. And the next king didn't know Joseph, and he made them slaves. And so they were there for 4 generations. And now God is decided, as a result of a promise to Abraham, that he's going to bring them out. Well, what happened while they were there? What happens to everybody? They were infected by the doctrines of the people around them. That's a very important lesson. They were infected by the doctrines of the people around them. What were they infected with? They were infected with the ideology that there are actually gods. Pretty much heathen individuals or people that are superstitious. When a thing can move, let's just say you're looking at an object and you don't recognize that object. It might appear, let's just say, it might appear to be a stick. And all of a sudden, it moves. Well, you might say, well, what is it that is a stick that moves? Well, we know that a praying mantis can look like whatever it has attached itself to. There are different bugs and creeping critters, I call them, that can look like something else, an inanimate object, and all of a sudden it moves, and what do you say? It's alive. Or there are animals in other countries that they sometimes just look like a blob on the ground, and that could be possibly a rock, or the way it's encased, it could be in the grass, and it looks like it's not really real, and it's a porcupine-looking thing, as in Australia. But when it moves, you basically say it's alive. Superstitious individuals, as they saw the sun moving across the sky, and they recognized that the movement of the sun, it actually changed the weather at different times. They began to worship it. It's alive. Why? Because it's moving. Superstitious individuals, this is what they do when they get away from their instructions. So here you are with the Egyptians. They're worshiping all kinds of stuff. And the children of Israel, they're far away from their instructions because they are, in fact, in slavery here. They're in servitude and they're infected. How do I know they're infected? Exodus 32, we're still at Mount Sinai. Moses is in the process of getting the information to set up this nation and their national worship. He's away in Sinai for 40 days. And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron and said unto him, Up, make us gods, which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we know not what is become of him. See how fickle they are. And that's the way individuals are. That's the way Americans are. We go headlong into just materialism is just, it has infected the entire nation. And now all of a sudden, you can't get the things that you want. You don't even know what to think. And so everybody is fixating on toilet paper. For the life of me, this is about as ridiculous as these individuals who made a calf to worship when, in fact, this particular god of the Egyptians couldn't take care of the Egyptians that chased them through the Red Sea and they perished. I'm saying when people become infected, like let's just say materialism is what we're infected with, the things that we need are the things that are animating us right now. I mean, one of the things that people are worried about, just say for instance, this is a thought, that I'm having, that I generally wonder at when I think about people today. You're worried about being infected. So you go to the supermarket where who knows who is in the supermarket, and you get your goods, and then you turn around, and when it comes time to worship, you say, all these people that I know that I worship with, I don't know if I want to go be around them because I might get infected. You mean to tell me that you can go to the supermarket where you have no clue who the people are that are in there, and you don't know who just left, and you're going to go to the supermarket, and here's what you're going to say, but we need food. Well, do you not need to worship? Who is it that's really going to keep you alive? Who is it that's going to keep you safe? I don't understand why people say that our food, going to the supermarket and getting our food, is more important than making sure that we're being obedient to God at a time like this. And you know the people that you're worshiping with. I mean, you could ask every one of them where they've been and the things they've done. You can get pretty specific. Well, you say they might carry it and they don't know it. Well, what about the people at the supermarket? How in the world do you know they're not carrying it? But see what I'm saying? Oh, we'll go to the supermarket and things of that nature, but when it comes time to, well, I don't think I want to worship because I might be infected. Listen, the most important thing in your life is worshiping God. And you might say, Johnny, it's dangerous out there. Wasn't it dangerous in the first century? I mean, the very passages that we're reading right here, you know what was going on right here? These individuals were huddled, scared to death. They were worried what was going to happen next because their rulers had killed their Messiah, their king. And that's what I'm saying. Jesus is elevating their confidence by telling them, look, I fulfilled all the things in the scriptures that are written about me. I fulfilled all the things in the scriptures. And the things in the scriptures that I fulfilled, they began at Moses. Anything in the scriptures in Genesis about Jesus? Yes. Then Moses wrote it. That's what's giving them confidence. That's what you need. You need this all in order so that you can understand it, so that you can process it. Now, here's the thing. Here's where we are. They're infected. You see them, they're infected. What is it that they need? Well, if they're worshiping this, here's what they need. Right now, when people are impacted in this way, they're made to think they need to get information that will help them to disinfect, help them to reset, and that's what was going on at Mount Sinai. They were scared to death. The sounds of these trumpets and the smoke and the fire and the quaking and the voice of God, the trumpets, all of that was scaring them to death. And notice, this is basically what they needed. They needed Genesis 1 and 2. That calf is not your God. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. This was written to people who were at Mount Sinai. This was written to people who were infected. This was written to people who already knew who they were. They knew their tribes and their family lineage. They would need further information, possibly things to correct. As they were hearing this, there is no doubt as they were hearing the narrative of Genesis, and as Genesis was eventually being put into written form, as they were hearing the narrative, they were learning things. They were being made to have made application in their minds. Here is an instance of this. In Deuteronomy 6, notice, and this is not the first time that this is said, Deuteronomy 6:3, hear therefore, O Israel, and observe to do it, that it may be well with thee, that you may increase mightily, as the Lord God of thy fathers has promised thee, in the land that floweth with milk and honey. I want you to think about this. They are being told that they're being prepped as a nation with laws that are just, they're supreme. Other nations will look at them and say, who is this great nation with such great laws and a God so near to them? We talked about that part last week, near to them. They're being prepped and they're being told that they're going to a land that flows with milk and honey. Now, when you are headed for a land that flows with milk and honey, a precious land, a promised land, what do you think you need to hear? I think you need to hear, I don't think this, I'm saying God did this. God is the one that had Moses to narrate that their parents, the persons from which all of us ultimately flow, Adam and Eve, were in a land like what they're being promised. As a matter of fact, this whole area that they're headed into is called the Fertile Crescent because it is such a flourishing part of the earth with the Jordan River flowing down the middle of it. It is a wonderful place that they're being told. So as they're being told that they're going to go into this and that they need to pay attention to observe and do the things that God has said, that it might be well with you and that you can increase mightily as the Lord God of thy God thy fathers promised thee in the land that flows with milk and honey, what do they need to hear? And the Lord planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. Well, what happened? Did he remain there? Was that a great enjoyment and blessing to him? That's what I'm saying is the land they're going into is much the same, much like it. This is actually where Lot went. Lot lifted up his eyes and looked at the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord. So basically, they're headed back to this same area. Sodom and Gomorrah is gone, but this other area is still there. This is a wonderful area. They're headed back to it, and it's called like the Garden of Eden, even as the garden of the Lord. So what do they need to hear? They need to hear a narrative about what happened to their first parents who were living in this area that they're about to go back to. And you might say, John, are you saying they're going back to the Garden of Eden? I didn't say that. I'm saying that God himself said the land that where Lot chose when he had strife with Abraham was like that. God said it was actually a land that was well watered and like that. That's the land that flows with milk and honey. That's where they're going. Well, why? What do they need to hear? They need to hear that Adam and Eve were driven out of that. They need to hear that it is a possibility if you don't watch out, if you don't do something, you'll end up being just like that. Is that what they need to hear? Do you think it's not what they need to hear? You know what, folks? This is what we need to hear. Because from time that is spoken of in the Garden of Eden until now, this is the problem. When we get right down to it, this is what they're hearing. They're hearing a narrative about the Garden of Eden. They're hearing it on the heels of the fact, or at the very same time that their ears are hearing that they're going back to an area just like that, flowing with milk and honey. Well, what happened to the first couple? Well, let's look. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Let's notice verse 3. But I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, your mind should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. Moses, God first, through Moses, knew that Jacob's children, the nation of Israel, that they too needed to hear about what happened to the first persons who inhabited an Eden-like place. Actually, Eden. We're going back to that same area, flowing with milk and honey. What happened to them? Satan, through his subtlety, beguiled Eve. Now, how did he do that? He did that through lust. Look at Romans chapter 7. And let's notice, as Paul starts talking about this very thing. Notice, what shall we say then, Romans 7:7? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin but by the law. For I had not known lust, except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. Now I want you to think about this. They are being told in Exodus chapter 20, the 10 Commandments, as it is called, actually contains the same kind of talk. That you're not supposed to have any other God before God. You're not supposed to bow down to any of this. We'll look at that as we go along. That is a lesson on lust. Why would anybody bow down to the sun? It's because they want what the persons who are infecting their head with the doctrine that the sun is a God, they want what the God is supposed to give them. That's why you bow down to money. That's why you bow down to plastic. It's because in your infected mind, you are basically convinced to participate or inhabit an alternate universe, an alternate thinking process or lifestyle. You are being convinced that the life that contains the most money or adequate money, plastic, which gives you credit further out than the money that you have, different things like status symbols, like the particular kinds of vehicles and a special kind of clothing and things of that nature, that those are the kinds of things that will actually move you along into a better position. That's an alternate mindset. It's actually not reality. Reality is that there are spiritual things that are actually the things that will move you where you need to be, keep you safe, give you peace, give you a different kind of life, and it is very, very difficult to deal with this alternate reality. The reality that we live in is everybody's infected with that, and we have to live amongst these individuals and not allow it to infect us. So, what's Paul saying? I had not known lust. What is lust? Lust is that part, our passions, that end up responding to this alternate thinking process that is put around us at all the times. You might say, put around us all the time. Do you have a TV? Listen, man, if you're watching something on TV, have you ever stopped and counted the amount of minutes that you have to sit and listen to a commercial? I'm saying, seriously. Now, I mess around with Lori sometimes, my wife, when it's time for commercials. I'm saying commercials just are just a total distraction to me. I'm talking about to the point where I just about have apoplectic fits about commercials. And here's why. If I were doing a commercial in the house, let's just say, for instance, sometimes I just do this. I just start making a commercial while a television show's going on about Bluebell ice cream. How would you like some Bluebell ice cream? Why don't we run down and go get some Bluebell ice cream? Man, Bluebell ice cream is the best thing, and there's so many different kinds, and I just go on for about 5 minutes. My wife finally says, would you please be quiet? I said, why don't you tell the TV to be quiet when it's doing the stupid commercials that talk about stuff that we don't even need, like new cars and all this kind of stuff. You see what I'm talking about? You are being bombarded, and you say, well, that don't affect me. Seriously, who are you? You think you're Superman? It does affect you. You see stuff that you didn't even know existed, and all of a sudden, next thing you do, you're thinking about getting it. Well, where'd that seed come from? It's the same thing. In Genesis chapter 3, the children of Israel who are infected with idolatry, they are actually hearing about individuals in paradise, much like where they're headed, according to Genesis chapter 13, a land like Eden. They're infected with this idolatry, and they're hearing that their first parents lost the promised land that they had as a result of what? In that particular instance, the serpent beguiled Eve, convinced her by enticing her with words. Look at this. Whatever it is, I have no idea what that fruit was. Whatever it is, it can make you wise. You know, being wise, you think about the thought of being wise. Y'all, when you think about Bible words and Bible concepts, give your brain the opportunity to at least study and be imaginative. Being wise, sometimes individuals say, you know what, Johnny, I can give you some tips. Let's just say, for instance, if I was a gambler, I can give you some tips on the horses, and you know what? You can get ahead, and this is foolproof. And so I basically am enticed by that. $10 bet gives me $100. I have no idea what kind of the odds you'd have to have. But see, that's what we're talking about here. He is enticing her with the thought process that actually you can get ahead. You can actually be something that you're not, accomplish something in a way that you're not being able to accomplish it here. Now, Adam and Eve were in fact working in the Garden of Eden. And God had told them, don't be touching the fruit, don't eat it, they're not to look at it. This is coming out of Eve's mouth, and what's Satan saying? It'll make you wise. It'll make you as God. God knows that when you eat it, you'll actually be wise. So that is just a basic. When you get down to it, you might say, how many times do I need to read that? Well, how many times are you enticed to do things that you don't know the end of? What do you mean by that? You don't know the end of. Let's drop on down here and let's see how Paul talks about this. Now, folks, what we're doing right now is we're using the New Testament, and we are taking the instructions that we have, and we're going back and letting Genesis have its application in our mind, because Adam and Eve are actually examples for us, just like they're example for the children of Israel. They're having that narrated to them at Mount Sinai because they're infected with lust. They're infected with idolatry. Covetousness is idolatry, Colossians 3:10 says. We're infected with it in our nation. Just as we said a moment ago, if you're going shopping and all them people out there that you don't know and where they've been and the last time they coughed and who sneezed and whatever, but you don't go to worship because, well, these people that I know and I can check and see where they've been and all this kind of stuff, I'm afraid they might give me the coronavirus. But I got to have my food. You're infected. So you got to have some kind of plan to come up with. So notice what happens. He's talking about lust. In 2 Corinthians 11, that was Paul writing that too. He's worried about them being enticed, being beguiled. And notice what he said when I said, sometimes you end up doing things that you don't know what the end is. Notice, listen to how this plays out. But sin, I had not known lust except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. Now, but when he's saying he didn't know, he's saying that he didn't know the results. This is the idea of actually being able to know in the sense of seeing consequences. Just telling somebody thou shalt not covet doesn't mean you get to see the consequences and now you know the power of covetousness. When you know the power of covetousness is either one of two things. You read about somebody else's life and the negative results that happen as a result of them giving into lust, or you yourself do it and you learn firsthand. Which one's better? Isn't it better to actually read about other individuals and how they were negatively affected by lust and the things they had to go through, the perils that they had to deal with, the sorrows, being shot through with perils? Isn't it better to see it that way and get to know it that way than just say, well, I'm going to have to experience this myself? Okay, listen how he says, but sin, taking occasion by the commandment, wrought in me all manner of concupiscence, for without the law sin was dead. Now, all he's basically saying is when there is a prescription laid out by God, when there is something said about a thing that will hurt you, could affect you in a negative way, and that is put in place, that's the door where sin actually can be entered. He's not saying anything about that commandments made it negative or commandments are the problem. Commandments are what is keeping us safe, but they're also the door which sin will enter in if you are longing for something. Concupiscence means the longing after something. Eve evidently was longing after the fruit. If there had been no law against it, there would be no opportunity for that passion to create a sin. Now, keep with me because we're going to get to that part about knowing a thing. And the commandment which was ordained to life, I found to be unto death, for sin taking occasion by the commandment deceived me, and by it slew me. Wherefore the law is holy, and the commandment holy and just and good. What was then that which is good made death unto me? God forbid. But sin, that it might appear sin, working death in me by that which is good, that sin by the commandment might become exceeding sinful. Now, I don't want to get into all of that, even though at some point we will. But I want you to get to this point where we're at the word know again. For that which I do, I allow not. I want you to look at this word allow not. That which I do, I allow not. This is the word, the simple Greek word, gnosko, which means to know. Again, he is not saying that he didn't know what lust was. He didn't know what lust could do. He didn't realize how dangerous it was, and the commandment actually is giving him information, and the count of Adam and Eve is giving these people at Mount Sinai an application, a particular picture of just how powerful lust was. They're being told in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not covet. Well, let's think about that. Is covetous dangerous? Same time, you're having narrated to yourself that God created the heavens and the earth. He is the sun, the moon, the skies, and the stars and the planets. They move, they're alive, they must be part of God. No, that God has placed them there. God is the creator of all that. And so you need to worship God. You need to realize He is the source of all of this. And then you see your first parents, and what did they do? They lusted. Thou shalt not covet. Well, what will coveting get me? Out, cast out of the Garden of Eden. You're headed to the Garden of Eden, or an Eden-like place that flows with milk and honey. Well, what could happen to you? If you get infected over there, you're going to be cast out. Look at this. For that which I do, I allow not. Paul is basically saying, when he says that I allow not, he's saying, I don't know. Do you know the consequences of things that you do all the time? I mean, there's plenty of things that you know the consequences of. But there are things that we actually know the consequences of, the potential consequences of. But do you know what? often you don't know how bad the consequences are. You're an individual that says, well, I know what the consequences of drinking and driving are. What are they? Well, you could get a DWI. No, you could kill somebody. You don't know all the consequences associated with that. You could actually maim yourself for life. That's what we're talking about here. He's talking about the fact that you don't know the ends of these things, and the law is there to help you. That's the whole point of this. For what I would, that I do not. For what I would, that I do not. But what I hate, that I do. The very thing that you want to accomplish, you don't end up doing it. Why? Because oftentimes, the subject is lust, oftentimes we allow ourselves to be infected and we actually end up accomplishing the very thing that we don't want to accomplish. Why? Because we allowed ourselves to be enticed. We allowed ourselves to be drawn away. That's what this is talking about. And it's a dissertation about how in the world you can be saved, a saved person, and this be going on. Well, I don't want to continue on that this morning because it is another thing, but it's demonstrating that we're just like them in that sense. All right, let's see what I have next. This is basically what they were being told. You know that the account in Exodus chapter 20, thou shalt not bow thyself down to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generations of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me. I want you to notice this section right here. God is a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. Have you ever considered, as you were reading through Genesis, and you come to the account of the table of nations before Genesis 6? You might say the table of nations. Johnny says that a lot, and I'm not sure that I have seen that in that sense. Genesis chapter 5. Now notice this. This is the book of the generations of Adam in the day that God created him. The likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them, and blessed them and called their name. And verse 3, Adam lived 130 years and begat a son that walked in his own likeness, and he called his name Seth. And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth was 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. And you keep on down through here. Seth lived 105 years, and he begat Enos. Now you're hearing about these individuals that were living up to the time of the flood. But I want you to notice here, as you're going through this, you're about to come to a man named Enoch. And Jared lived 162 years, and he begat Enoch. And Jared lived, after he begat Enoch, 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. And the days of Enoch were 962 years, and he died. And Enoch lived 65 years. Now watch how many generations there is to this point. God took Enoch. From Seth's time to Enoch, you have two individuals. Seth called on the name of God. Seth was a worshiper of God. And you get down to Enoch, and Enoch walked with God, the Bible says, and it ends up saying that God took him. Notice, verse 23. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. How many generations do you think from there to the flood? 3. God is a jealous God, and individuals started doing things of an idolatrous nature in this time frame, and God basically says, I'm not going to put up with it. And that's what he said in Exodus chapter 20, and this is being narrated to them at the very same time. As they're hearing Exodus 20 being told to them, which is where you find the Ten Commandments, they're also having Genesis narrated to them, and each one of these things can be made application to in the book of Genesis. When he said, I'm a jealous God, and I can visit the iniquity on the third and the fourth generation. Let's follow down through here. Methuselah is next, and Methuselah lived 108 years and begat Lamech. Now you've got two different ones, and Lamech lived 102 years and begat Noah. Noah is the fourth generation. 3 generations, and then God visits the iniquity on those generations, and Noah found grace and favor in God's sight, and God delivered him. Do you need to listen to what God says about going through 4 generations, 3 generations, the 3rd and 4th generations. You know, when you have a family and you don't learn, you do not study, you don't worship God for 2 generations, you know, people can completely go against everything that they were doing that was making a good life for them, in the sense, when I say good, good in the sense of the things that God would want to happen from you. The peace that you can have as a result of your family being taught to honor your father and your mother. Still, the New Testament says that in Ephesians chapter 6, 1 through 4. Training up your children in the way they should go, disciplining your children so that they respect you. The different things that the Bible says that you can enjoy as a result of putting these things into practice, staying married because you treat your wife in the fashion that you should treat her in 1 Peter chapter 3, the different things that you have in place, you can begin to see them deteriorate in just the 2nd generation. So the 2nd generation, they know what you taught them, and some of those things they keep in play, and they might not have the worst life, but they don't teach them to the 3rd generation, and the 3rd generation just runs amok, and the 4th generation, man. I have a book that is entitled Jukes. It could be The Jukes, or it could be just Jukes. It is actually written in the 1800s about crime in New York. And this person's involved in the prison system, and the reason he writes it is he is working on the theory that it is possible that it isn't the case, as the religious people say, that you're born in sin, and that's why people are so bad, is because they come into the world depraved. He decided, as a result of being in the prison system, not as a prisoner, in the person who's trying to reform prison system, he starts studying how that it can be that individuals who are from a degenerate family, basically a family who is 2 or 3 or 4 generations away from having any kind of information that would be of a spiritual nature, keeping God's commandments. He starts studying those families and looking at, through the prison system, how many of them are in jail, or how many of them are delinquents, ne'er-do-wells, not homosexuals back then, prostitutes, possibly homosexuals. I don't know, I can't remember what all's in there. But he documents one particular family that he calls the Jukes. That's not really their family. But he follows their family line and their criminal records, and it goes back to an individual that was so bad, and all of his children and grandchildren and grandchildren and grandchildren. It's a pretty amazing thing. It's not really that amazing. This is what the Bible says. Because basically, a general principle that you'll read over and over and over in the Old Testament is that the 4th generation, He's done. He's tired of it. You might say, well, how's that the case? If you just take, for instance, let's see here where we are. We're good to leave this from the standpoint about the 4th generation. Genesis chapter 15, verse 13. And he said unto Abraham, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall be afflicted for 400 years. And also the nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, and be buried in a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. Well, when's it going to be full? 4 generations. In 4 generations, it's basically in God's mind that this group of individuals is so bad that they're going to be wiped out. I'm going to bring the children of Israel. You see, this is actually the prophecy that tells you how it is that you know God is in charge when the children of Israel are in captivity in Egypt. It is a time frame, while they're in Egypt, is a time frame where the Amorites' iniquity and abominations is just so unbelievably bad. Why would you want to be living here? You can be over in Egypt, and you're actually in a position, even though you end up in servitude, a nation incubated in Egypt. 75 individuals come over there, and 601,000, an army of 601,000 leaves. That was a place where they could incubate. Was it hard? Yes. Could they have dealt with all of this? I don't know. The Amorites were an abominable group of individuals. There's actually 7 nations here that are just, they're going to be wiped out. God's just saying there's no point in them existing any longer. You see this business about the 4th generation? It is a very real principle. You need to make sure that you're teaching your children so that they'll teach your grandchildren, because your great-grandchildren could just run amok. They could destroy the entire reputation, the name that has been built up as these individuals are good people. See these principles? This is all in the book of Genesis, and it's all connected to Exodus. And these individuals in Exodus 20 are hearing this, and they're hearing it narrated at the same time they're hearing Genesis narrated as examples of this very thing. Now, let's go back. Let's notice this. So, in Genesis 5, you have Enoch, 3 generations, and we get to the point where the world is so bad, God saw the wickedness of man that was great on the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was on evil continually. How about that? If you were at Mount Sinai, you've been with the Egyptians, you have your mind infected to the point where you think a calf is just so ridiculous. You think a calf that was the God of the people that are laying at the bottom of the Red Sea, you think that calf is going to deliver you. And you just basically, your thinking process is just run amok. You're infected. And you're basically now hearing the end of individuals who continue down this road. God eventually just said the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every imagination of the thought of his heart was on evil continually. And what did God do? He removed them. You think they didn't need to hear that? Can I say this again? This business about what we're seeing in our midst. Y'all, this business about them and the calf, we say, this is the most ridiculous thing that I just can imagine that people do, that people would be doing. Well, how about going to a store and you're worried about a virus? Now, the virus attacks your upper respiratory system, and you're buying all the toilet paper. I just don't get that. Now, I will say that when it snows around here, people, they get pretty wild, but at least the thing they do is sensical. They buy bread and milk. Those are perishable items that you can only keep so long, even if you do have a refrigerator, and even if you do keep the bread tie closed. So you're getting fresh bread and you're getting milk because you're going to be holed up. But what's the deal with toilet paper? In all of the time that I have ever been seeing different disastrous things go on, and I've lived overseas, folks, I know what it's like to not have your goods. We lived on an island where every single thing that you ate, it came in as an import. Came on one of those big, huge container ships. You could see it out there in the lagoon for miles coming in, and everybody's waiting on it because your all kinds of stuff was gone. What you did have, if it was in a box like cereal or a cream of wheat, had weevils in it, and you're basically eating pancakes with weevils in it. It's I know what that's like, but this business about toilet paper, and I have a friend who is in Arizona. He sent me a picture of the toilet paper aisle, and right beside it was the napkin aisle. And it was just, I'm saying it was packed full. Napkins. Right beside the toilet paper, the aisle where the napkins and the paper plates and all that are, it was packed full. Now, what is the infatuation with toilet paper? Or is it the case that a person doesn't know that a napkin is, I'm saying there's no toilet paper there. So what are they doing? They're going to run to another store that doesn't have any toilet paper and try to get some toilet paper when right beside you were dinner napkins. You know, napkins, all different kinds of dinner napkins. And you know, when we're getting down to this, being sensical, texture of napkins are different. There's some napkins that are just cheap as anything and their texture is one way. There's some napkins that are very nice. Sometimes even you see pictures of Kleenex and the Kleenex are still there. But in this particular case, there was all kinds of napkins. People are just, that's what people do. Is that any different than what us looking at these individuals and the infection that had taken place in their brain to the point where they would erect a god? They would think something inanimate, something that was metal, in this particular case made out of gold, was going to save them. I kind of think we know how that drill goes, don't we? Now, let me ask you, is this the way to study Genesis? Isn't this much better than you trying to grind through Genesis and figure different things out? This is the aisle where the napkins are, right to, I don't know, your right or your left. It starts right behind this woman and heads back this way. And so that's in Arizona. All right, now, I want you I'm tossed between two. I think I'm going to talk about some study habits here, because I think I need to further convince you that you need to make sure that you're reading Genesis in context, and you're recognizing that the individuals that are getting it narrated to them and are going to have it written where they can continue to study it the rest of their lives, these individuals know portions of it and understand the application that's being given to them by God, and it's helping them. On the other hand, you grinding through it without knowing where it fits is not going to help you. And so I think I'm going to prove that to you. Let's just go ahead and let's notice a couple of things. Let's look at, let's just take Genesis. Let me set my search bar here so that we're only going to see Genesis, and you see if this makes sense. All right, Genesis 1 through Genesis 50. That's my search. And I'm going to put in the word tithe, and I'm going to put an asterisk so we'll get all the S's too. And so basically, I know I did something wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. I know that tithe is also spoken of with another word. But as you're reading to Genesis 14, you're going to read that Abraham gave Melchizedek tithes. Let's just do our handy interlinear so that we can show you what the word tithe actually means. It is from a Hebrew word that basically means a tenth part. So he gave Melchizedek a tithe. Now, here's what you're going to actually be dealing with. Let's just go there so that we can X this other one out. I don't remember where we were. Let's see. Now, we'll get the whole verse in front of us. And he took him unto him all these, and he divided in the midst, and he laid a tithe. Let me see. I don't know what I did. Genesis 14. Genesis chapter 14, and I believe it was verse 10. And let's see, what was it? Okay, I'm wasting time here. Well, I could just go ahead and do it again. 14:20 is what it was. 14:20. Now, when you get here, there's no explanation. You're just going to be reading a book that you really don't have any business reading first, given that it's just going to introduce all kinds of things to you that you don't know what they are. In other words, you're going to have to go out of this book in order to get anything from the book, but you're going to be confused because you're running into it. Why did Abraham do that? Well, let's do another. It's the same thing with Cain and Abel. You're reading the account of Cain and Abel in Genesis chapter 4, and you come across verse 7, and you see that the Bible says God accused Cain of sin. You can grind your brain until doomsday comes, and you're not going to find out what sin is or what the sin was in this passage. You see what I'm saying to you? You're going to do this all the way through. Let's do another search. That was tithe a while ago. That's sin. Let's look at this. Notice this. You're going to find facts, but you're not going to know what it is that you're actually talking about, that is being talked about. Let's see. Now, in Genesis 7, when Noah is being told to put certain kind of animals on the ark, notice what's happening. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by sevens. Where are you going to find the answer to what is a clean beast? You're not going to find it in Genesis. What you're going to find is, you're going to find the fact of sin. You can stay in Genesis till doomsday, the entire book. You can read the entire book and you're not going to find out the answer to Genesis 4:7. You can read the entire book 50,000 times and you're not going to find the answer to Genesis 14:20. You can read it 100,000 times and you're not going to find the answer to Genesis 7:2. You're in a book that was not designed for you to start in it, even though it's at the beginning. It has to be somewhere, y'all. Just because it is in the beginning of your never know what's going to happen. That was 11:25 to. Anyway, what we were talking about is the fact of trying to study, and you're going to run into these different problems. Here's another one. Men began to call upon the name of the Lord. You're not going to figure this out in Genesis. You're just going to have the fact of it. It's the same thing with let's just say Genesis chapter 20. I'm going to move to Genesis chapter 20, and I'll look for it when I get there. Abimelech, as you move down, Abraham is in, he has gone down into Egypt on the second occasion, and Abimelech basically thinks that Sarah is his sister. So he decides that he is going to betroth her, or he's going to be involved with her. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, what sawest thou that thou hast done this thing? And Abraham said, because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place. Well, what is he talking about? Abimelech was going to take Abraham's wife to himself. Now, we do not have any record of the rules associated with marriage, divorce, and remarriage, or adultery. But we actually know the fact of it because in Genesis chapter 20, God is going to kill Abimelech for doing this, for actually making a mistake and taking Sarah into his harem. And so we get the fact of it. And see, if you're reading this, you're finding out. Let me give you another one. In Genesis chapter 18, verse 19. Notice this. This is right before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham is being talked to about Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed. And he knows that Lot is there. And notice what is said about Abraham in Genesis 18:19. For I know him that he will command his children, that's one, and his household after him. He will keep the way of the Lord, that's two. To do justice, that's three. And judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him. There are four different indicators that these people during this time have laws. The way of the Lord, justice, judgment, and commands. Where are they? Do you know what they are? Do you know what is an unclean animal? Do you know what regulated a tithe? Why it is the only time that you read about it is, and I said a while ago I was doing something wrong. I know what it was when I said a tithe, let's do 10, and we should get a tenth in the account of dealing with Jacob. Jacob actually promises God that he will give 10, I believe is how he said it. Let's see. That's not it. And that's certainly not giving it to me that way. He may have said 1/10. But I'm just saying, I know that when he wrestled with the angel, Jacob actually agreed to give God 1/10 of his possessions, but he said it in such a way that it doesn't come up tithe. And I don't know what I typed in. So, but nevertheless, you're not going to know that either. You're basically going to be trying to figure out what it is that that Jacob is thinking, where he got this idea. And he called the name of Bethel, that place Bethel, but the name of that city was called Luz. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way, I will go and give bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I can come again to my father's house in peace. And this stone, this pillar, shall be God's house, and all that thou shalt give, I will surely give the 10th unto you. That's Genesis chapter 28, verse 22. You don't know why Jacob settles on the 10th, because there's no regulations that we're made knowledgeable of. And so, folks, here's the kind of thing that you need to recognize. Abimelech is not of anything to do with Abraham. What do I mean by that? He is not in Abraham's family. How is it that Abimelech has rules? He is a foreign king. Foreign in the sense he's not, a lot of times people say that the Old Testament is about Jews. Listen, folks, the Old Testament is filled with persons that are not from Abraham's family. Job, Job is a totally different individual altogether, and there are just all kinds of things that Job is doing that you have no idea why Job is doing. You would have to have extra information. There's Abimelech who has to live by certain laws. You have Melchizedek that Abraham gave a tenth to, a tithe to, and Melchizedek is called the King of Peace, King of Salem. How is it that all of this is being regulated, and how is it that he is a person that is greater than Abraham and that Abraham is paying tithes to in the first place? You won't know that. You'll be struggling with information that you'll never find the answer to in Genesis. But let me tell you, Genesis will always be a part of your study if you get the place of it. If you understand other things, they will actually point you back to Genesis, and you'll be able to understand those kinds of different things. Now, I really wanted to do something on time, and I may have time to do that. Kind of weird that I'm saying that way. Time to do it. Let's go. Let's look at some things that will help you in your study. Before I go to time, let me just say this. This what I just told you about Genesis, it's going to apply all throughout the Bible. Let's just say, for instance, that you said that you entered to a program and they had you study 1 Timothy. Anybody that tries to have you study 1 Timothy without first having you study Timothy, not the letter to Timothy, but study Timothy. What you need to do is first, before you study a letter to Timothy, you need to find out who Timothy is. I mean, for all you know, Timothy could be waiting on Herod. I'm saying the king's butler. If you study all of the places where Timothy is found, you will begin to find that Timothy is a person that came out of Acts chapter 16 and was chosen to help Paul. And you read the different places where he shows up, Titus as well. You read the different things that they were being told to do, how Paul used them, how they were sent here and there and their travels and the different responsibilities that they had. And what you do is you get to know the individual that you're about to read his mail. And once you do that, you'll understand why Paul said the things to Timothy that he said. You'll understand why Paul talks to Timothy about we don't have a spirit of fear. You'll see Paul talking to Timothy about different places that he is setting up order in. If you had already read Timothy, and you say, well, how am I going to do that, Johnny? I mean, there's not a book that says the book of Timothy's travels. Well, that's where a concordance comes in. You can actually look up in the concordance everywhere Timothy, and I'm going to do it. Now, one of the things about Timothy is his name is used differently in different places. So what we're going to do is we're going to narrow our search just to from Acts forward to Revelation, and I'm going to put in the beginning of Timothy's name, but I'm not going to finish it because it's spelled different in different places. So let's see what we get. 29 times you actually come across Timothy being noticed in the New Testament. And did I just kill my search? Let's see. Notice this. 29 times. That's down at the bottom of my search. And so look at what you're doing. You're running into Timothy or you're running into a person that has a name that's similar to Timothy. I had to put in the search with an asterisk so that I could get all of the different spellings of Timothy's name, whether it's Timothy or Timotheus, but this is the same person. So it's not that, for sure it's not 29, it's 28 because the Timon is a different person. So in chapter 16 you see him, chapter 17 you see him, and what is he doing? Chapter 17 verse 15, what is he doing? He's traveling around. Chapter 18 verse 5, when Silas and Timothy were come from Macedonia, Paul was pressed in the Spirit. They've been sent somewhere. Well, what is it that they're doing? So he sent into Macedonia 2 of them that ministered unto him, Timotheus and Erastus. He stayed in Asia for a season. Acts 20 verse 4. And there accompanying him in Asia, Sopater of Berea and of the Thessalonians, Aristarchus and Secundus and Gaius and of Derbe and Timotheus. See, these individuals are accompanying, they're being sent different places. He's called a work fellow to Paul and among other individuals. And so in 1 Corinthians 4:17, he is an individual that is being sent to the churches to remind them of the things that Paul has told them. In 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 10, now if Timothy has come, see that he may be with you without fear, for he worketh with the work of the Lord, as I do also. So you're reading all these different verses, and Paul and Timotheus, the servant of Jesus Christ, to all the saints of Christ Jesus who are at Philippi with the bishops and the deacons. He's recommending him. Then in 2:19, but I trust in the Lord Jesus to send Timotheus shortly, that I may be of good comfort when I know your state. See those things? When you familiarize yourself with the work that Timothy is doing, the traveling, the instructing, the things of that nature, choosing, setting in order, selecting elders, bishops, presbyters in the different churches, you end up being ready to read the book, the letter to Timothy. It's going to be a basic that you're always going to be dealing with. So let's look at time. The reason we want to look at time is because you probably think that you would read Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy in that order. That is incorrect. That is not the way it is set up. There are things that are going on concurrent. We're basically only talking about a little over a year, and Exodus is telling you one thing, and Leviticus is a part of what you're being told, and Numbers is a part of it at the same time. So if you read them in a different time zone, a different way, and you say, I'm going to read Exodus and then I'm going to go get to Numbers, you're not going to understand Numbers then either. You're going to wonder why this is the case, that it is sounding like you missed something. For instance, Exodus 40:17, and it came to pass in the first month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, that the tabernacle was reared up. You following me here? Exodus 40 basically tells you that this is the first month in the second year of the first day of the month. The tabernacle that they have been told how, the instructions on how to build, how to formulate, lots of different rules and things of that nature. Also, they've been hearing Genesis narrated to them as they were going through, and during the same time frame, they're being told the instructions of how to worship and how their nation's going to be. But the point is, you're in the first month in the second year. Well, look at this, Leviticus 9, verse 1. And it came to pass on the 8th day that Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. It's the same exact time frame. They have just reared up the tabernacle. Now, he's gone through several different kinds of rules and regulations about worship, about ceremonial laws and different things like that. And now we're at Leviticus chapter 9, and it came to pass on the 8th day. A while ago, we're on the first day. They were rearing up the tabernacle. And on the first day, Moses called Aaron, his sons, and the elders of Israel. And he sets up the priesthood in front of everybody. That's on the 8th day. Look at Numbers, and notice, you know what happens next? They're actually about to have their first worship assembly in the tabernacle, after the tabernacle has been reared up, and they begin to offer sacrifices. Let me just go ahead and show you what's going to take place. And the priesthood is set forth in front of these individuals, and then after they offered their burnt sacrifice, notice what happened. Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer and put fire therein, and put incense thereon, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. And there went out a fire from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. What in the world? Worship. And setting up the priesthood and having all the rules in place and having warned these individuals, and then the two sons of Aaron actually offer wrong when it comes to the incense. And God actually kills them right there. They were devoured with fire before the Lord, and they died before the Lord. First worship assembly. They did something wrong, as simple as wrong fire. Now listen, y'all, you need to know that these things are happening concurrent. You need to know that Exodus 40:17 is in the first month of the second year, on the first day. Now we're on the 8th day, and we're seeing all of this preparation now come into fruition. They're going to have a worship assembly, these august things that they're seeing, these individuals that are hallowed and sanctified, and that they only can come in front of the Lord or come and do these services. And the two sons of Aaron end up being killed because they did it wrong. And not only that, when it happened, notice what is said to Aaron. Then Moses said unto Aaron, this is that the Lord spake. In other words, this is what I told you, saying, I will be sanctified in them that come nigh me, and before all the people I will be glorified. And Aaron held his peace. Your two boys got killed, and this is what I told you in the first place. God is a God that is not to be pilfered with. Now you might say, man, this God, he is just really, this is some ridiculous stuff. Listen, y'all, we're talking about everything that is associated with their government, with their ability to be a just nation, a righteous nation, a kind and merciful nation. Everything that they are going to become is associated with what's going on right here. They are a theocracy. God is at their head. Their worship is national. They have a priesthood that is supported by all of the different individuals that are in the different tribes. Levi doesn't have an inheritance like that. God is Levi's inheritance. This would be just like somebody meddling with the Supreme Court or one of our branches of government. You just don't do that. And you know you don't do that. You come up on the president's lawn and you're uninvited. What do you think is going to happen to you? In today's world, probably shot. What about the Supreme Court? You come into the halls of the Supreme Court and you don't belong there, what's going to happen? I don't know if you'd be shot, tased, or what, but in today's environment, I wouldn't even think about doing it. This is what we're looking at here. And Moses is just saying, this is what I told you. These are the instructions that God gave me on the mount. This vision that we're seeing of Mount Sinai, did it not impact upon your mind the dangerous nature of actually crossing God? Well, evidently it didn't. And if you read on, one of the first things that is said is there's a warning about drinking in this particular segment. So, y'all, it's very important that you realize that this is going on concurrent. Now notice this, Numbers 1:1. The Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle congregation on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they were come out of the land of Egypt. I think I'll read Exodus and Leviticus, then I'll read Numbers. If you do, you're actually robbing yourself. If Exodus 40:17 says it was the first day of the first month, and then you get to the 8th day in Leviticus chapter 9 verse 1, and then at the opening of Numbers chapter 1 verse 1, you find out that this is the first day of the second month, the second year, you just basically have, what did we say, 8 days? You have 22 days, something like that. You have 22 days transpire, and it's actually Numbers 1:1. Man, there's a lot of reading between Exodus 40 and Numbers. Well, there may be, but somebody needs to tell you there's not a lot of time. This is happening concurrent. There are things that are being told in Numbers that are applicable because it's the same time frame. It's just the second month. So why would you not read this information concurrent? Now, I will say this. You can read Leviticus, even though you need to realize that there are things that are happening that are associated with the same time frame as things that are being written in Exodus. You can read things in Leviticus that would be basically narration of laws. You would be learning certain things about certain laws, but you need to realize that there will be times where all of a sudden they would actually be concurrent. They would be happening at the same times that things that are being talked about in Exodus, and you wouldn't want to get those out of chronological order. Now, I hope that helps you, because it is wonderful to read this the way that it is actually written, or it's meant to be. Now, you see what I'm reading right here? Numbers 3. It's only the second month after 22 days basically after Nadab and Abihu died. And so here you are. It tells you that. It tells you the time frame, second month in the second year. Now, it's the first day of the second month. And then when you read in Numbers 3:4, he narrates that Nadab and Abihu died before the Lord when they offered strange fire from before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai, and they had no children, and Eleazar and Ithamar ministered in the priest's office in the sight of Aaron their father. It's not even 3 weeks that this is actually being said is happening. So you need to be reading what's going on in these other passages. Number 7:1, it came to pass on the day that Moses had fully set up the tabernacle. What day was that? Exodus 40, verse 17. And anointed it and sanctified it, and all the instruments thereof, both the altar and the vessels thereof, and had anointed them and sanctified them. Look at that. You just went backwards in time. A minute ago, you were reading in Numbers 1:1 that it is the second month, the first day. Now, you're actually reading that on the same day that Moses had fully set up the tabernacle, which is Exodus 40, verse 17, and sanctified and anointed it and all the instruments thereof, both the altar and the vessels thereof, and anointed them and sanctified them. Evidently, something else is about to happen. Let's look at it. Numbers chapter 7, verse 1. Notice, I'm really surprised with that glitch a while ago that we actually have time to do this. Numbers chapter 7, verse 1. And it came to pass on the day that Moses fully set up the tabernacle and anointed it and sanctified it and the instrument thereof, both the altar and the vessels thereof, and anointed them and sanctified them, that the princes of Israel, heads of the house of the fathers, who were the princes of the tribe and were over them that were numbered, offered. Now, get this. This is just too good. So, it takes place on the day. Let's say it this way. On the day that you read about in Exodus 40, verse 17, it says that he reared up the tabernacle. And then when you get to Leviticus, 8 days has passed. Well, what happened between that time frame and this time frame? Well, here's the information. It came to pass the princes of the heads of Israel, house of fathers, who were princes of the tribes, who were over them that were numbered, they offered. Well, what are we talking about? Look at this. Here's what they offered. And they brought their offering before the Lord. Now, this is basically what you're going to now hear, is you're going to hear the sons of Israel, Jacob. They're not still alive. Judah's not still alive. Simeon's not still alive. Levi's not still alive. Reuben's not still alive. But these are their children, like their direct descendants, and they are the princes of the tribes. Asher and Zebulun, they're all going to basically be here. Now, I'm going to have to look, because I have all this laid out in my Bible so that we can tell. This is really important. You try to figure out what is going on. Let me just go ahead just a minute. I'm going to open up another Bible spot here. You try to figure out Numbers chapter 16, verse 1. Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, son of Reuben, took men, and what did they do? They came before Moses with a certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown, and they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. Why did they do that? Right here's the answer. In Numbers chapter 7, which is basically only 3 weeks removed from where you were a while ago in Numbers chapter 1, now you're reading in Numbers chapter 7, which is actually happening at the same time as Exodus 40, 17. Even though you didn't read about it in Exodus chapter 40, verse 17, Numbers covers it in Numbers chapter 7. You see what I'm talking about? If you don't read this information in a concurrent fashion, you're never going to actually get the full benefit of what is taking place and actually seeing the whole picture, how it's playing out. It's like not knowing the travels in the book of Acts, that they are actually happening and you're getting to read them as they happen, and then you see the letters being written to these individuals and you understand what's going on with the Judaizers and why the letter to the Galatians needs to be written because of things that are going on in Acts chapter 15. If you don't know those kinds of things as a New Testament student, you'll never figure it out. That's why you have these pastors that don't know anything, that just keep feeding you the same garbage, and you can never figure it out because you don't know how to study. So here we are. Watch what happens. Let me just move ahead right quick. There's going to be 6 wagons that are being given. They brought their offers before the Lord. 6 covered wagons, 12 oxen, a wagon for 2 of the princes, and for each one an ox. And they brought them before the tabernacle, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, take it of them, that they may be to do the service of the tabernacle of the congregation. Thou shalt give them unto the Levites, and to every man according to his service. Now watch this. Moses took the wagons, 6 wagons, and the oxen, and he gave them unto the Levites. 2 wagons and 4 oxen he gave the son of Gershon, according to their service. 4 wagons and 8 oxen he gave unto the sons of Merari, according to their service, into the hand of Ithamar, the son of Aaron the priest. And to Kohath he gave none. Who was involved just a minute ago in this rebellion? Kohath. Unto Kohath he gave none. Well, guess what? Kohath and his family's job is to basically carry the Ark of the Covenant and the most holy things. He doesn't need the wagons. He has a totally different job. But can you imagine? You've got these wagons full of items and oxen being given to these other Levites who have a totally different job. And to Kohath was given none, because the service of the sanctuary belonged unto them, was that they should bear upon their shoulders. Now, notice this as we go along. The princes offered for dedicating of the altar in the day that it was anointed. Even the princes offered their offering before the Lord, before the altar. And the Lord said unto Moses, they shall offer their offerings, each prince on his day, for the dedication of the altar. Now, you're about to get to see the order of things, and you're not going to recognize it. This is basically now where you would need to go back and you would need to study the account associated with Jacob's sons, and you would then understand why it is that these individuals are ordered as they are. Now, it says Judah was first. I'm just going to look at it. I'm going to look at it in my Bible, and I'm going to tell you how it is, how each one of these lines up. Verse 12 says, Judah was first, Issachar was next, Zebulun was next, third, Reuben was fourth, Simeon was fifth, Gad was sixth, Ephraim was seventh, Manasseh was eighth, Benjamin was ninth, Dan was 10th, Asher was 11th, and Naphtali is 12th. Now, you're not going to understand what's going on, why these individuals came in this procession, unless you were to go back and you were actually to read the birth of these children, these particular children, as they were birthed to Jacob. And if you do, that it will actually make sense to you in the sense of how they were actually birthed into what person they belonged, and it is the exact order that you would expect. Just give me a second. So, if you are reading in Genesis chapter 28 first, you actually will read which children belong to whom, and to whom were given handmaids, and to which handmaid different children belong, and it's going to be the same group of individuals, and they're going to be these princes. They're grandsons of these men are the princes. Now, in Genesis 29, verse 30, and Leah conceived and bare a son, and his name was Reuben. Now, Reuben was in the first list, but he wasn't the first son. Judah is the first one that ends up being listed. Well, why is that? As a prince, Judah's great-grandson is listed first in the princes that offered. Why is that? Why isn't Reuben? Well, Reuben actually lay with his father's concubine, Bilhah. And as a result of that, he lost his first rank. You would find that in Genesis. The next person that is born, that is conceived, is Simeon. And Simeon is born to Leah. Well, as we were watching that, Simeon also wasn't first. Judah was first. Well, why wasn't Simeon first? And next was born Levi. Well, Levi wasn't in that list at all. Well, Levi doesn't get an inheritance because he is a special place as individuals who take care of the holy things. But, well, then why is Simeon removed? Simeon caused trouble with the Shechemites and made Jacob distinct throughout all the land, and he is diminished in the lineup of the family lineup, and Judah ends up being the first individual. So basically it goes like this. It will be Judah, and then Reuben will be down the line about number 6. I can't remember exactly which one, but I want you to notice it ends up being, even though that's the only 4 that you see there, you turn the page and you start seeing that Leah has a handmaid, and her handmaid starts having children. They are Gad and Asher, and Leah then starts being fruitful again, and she has Issachar, Zebulun, and finally a daughter named Dinah. All of this has to do with how these individuals were lined up around in regard to the offering to princes to supply the holy things, supply the things needed for the tabernacle and things of that nature. And when you come to actually moving, when they finally start moving away from Mount Sinai, you're going to see all of them positioned in a certain way. When they get their tribal lots, if you don't know that these individuals are actually brothers of the same mother and are brothers of a handmaid that would have spent time in the house of Leah, you're not going to understand why it is that the individuals were given different places throughout the land of Palestine, the promised land. You won't understand why Simeon and Judah can be mixed together and what sense it makes for Dan to be right there. Well, if you know that they're the brothers, their fathers are all the same, but they're brothers but of different mothers. And you might say, well, all of them are brothers of different mothers. Yes, that's true. But the thing is, some of them's mother has a handmaid who waits on them, and the proximity, the association that they had growing up with that individual is going to be different. Leah's handmaid, whose name is Zilpah, the children that were born to Zilpah, they would be in proximity to Leah's children. So basically what that means is, let's get who they are. They would be Gad and Asher. They would be in proximity to Leah, which would mean that they would have been growing up with Issachar, Zebulun, Dinah, which is the only daughter, and Simeon, Levi, Judah, and Reuben. Well then, where will the others be? The others will be Rachel's handmaid, who is Bilhah. That would be Dan, Naphtali, and then she actually is able to start bearing children herself, and now she has Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph has 2 sons who are Ephraim and Manasseh. And so if you get all of this in your head and you start realizing that Rachel is the prominent person here because she's the one that Jacob really wanted to marry. So for sure, Jacob's son, Joseph and Benjamin, are going to have a particular place in things that happen, and they're going to think a particular thing about what they deserve. That's one of the reasons that throughout all of the time that you're reading through the New Testament, you're going to see a difference or a problem between Judah, Benjamin, and Ephraim. Ephraim is a prominent son of Joseph who has Rachel to mother, the one that Jacob really loved. Benjamin also is the one that Jacob really loved. That's his first wife. He didn't even want to be married to Leah. It was given to him as a trick. But he has most of his children either from Leah or Leah's handmaid. And all of that is involved as you're reading the placement of the tribes, the treatment of the tribes. You know, I would say, as we're closing up right now, I cannot see how you would not think that it would be important to have this study with us. Given what we've seen this morning, the information that is actually there and that you're not going to get. I wasn't taught this in preaching school. I was confused for I don't know how many years until I started basically doing, in my Bible, if it's in green, at least it used to be this way in the Old Testament, it would be time. I wrote with a green pen, And I would look, when I go through there, I knew I was seeing time. Chronology, chronological order. It's so important for you to know Exodus 40:17 is basically happened right in the shadow of Leviticus chapter 9 and Numbers chapter 1 and Numbers chapter 3 and Numbers chapter 7. Just days apart. And let's say it took you 3 months to get to Numbers. You're reading Exodus and it takes you 3 months to get to Numbers. You've forgotten. You don't remember that Exodus 40:17 says this was the first day of the first month of the second year on the first day. You're not going to remember that the altar was reared up. If you're 3 months down the road, or it might even take you 6 months to get to Numbers. That's one of the reasons that people don't understand the information that is in there. And if you then recognize also at the same time, we're saying this, if you recognize at the same time that you're having to read Genesis as something that they're looking back to, you can actually be fitting Genesis in, and you will start knowing these things like they would really mean something to you. And all of a sudden you would realize, I do need to know who is Zilpah's sons. And I do need to know which sons belong to Leah, especially given you actually see them being given prominence. And the argumentation that happens with all these different individuals, it makes sense when you know who's Rachel's children or Rachel's grandchildren in the case of Ephraim and Manasseh. You'll see why they think they're so special. And Benjamin. First king came out of Benjamin from Saul. You'll see so many things if you'll study along with us. And today, I am very thankful that you have studied. This is my phone number, 276-806-2150. This is as an important time as I can remember in our entire lives. If I had lived during World War II, I would say that was more important back in those days. Man, people were studying their Bible during the world wars. Or during the Depression, man, people were studying their Bibles. I expect there are many of you that are studying your Bible. And so these lessons will be archived. They will stay up. They'll be delineated. Luke will be always on one place, and the accounts on Genesis will be over in another place, and there for you to go back and study. And if you want to get in contact with us, this is a great way. I don't have my email up, but surely you can remember Joe Blue 81. I actually have some books right quick. Let me just advertise them. Yesterday, Caleb was talking about 7-day Adventism. And we have this book called A Reply to an Adventist. And if you want a free copy of this, all you have to do is text me at that number or email me at joeblue81@gmail.com. God bless you. Always ask for, what does the Bible say?